Felicia Nguyen didn't arrive at the Hartridge County Courthouse expecting to make headlines. She believed she was simply there to offer moral support for her cousin Rodrigo Reyes, who had gotten tangled up in a minor charge. The day felt routine, a solemn courtroom, people waiting on wooden benches, lawyers leafing through their paperwork, police officers near the doors scanning the crowd. Felicia wore a modest gray jacket, pressed slacks, and simple flats, professional but unassuming. Around her neck was a thin silver chain with a tiny engraved star, so small it barely caught the light. She had no idea that within minutes, that star would become a flashpoint in front of everyone present. "Court is in session," the bailiff announced, and Judge Whitaker, a seasoned figure known for his no-nonsense demeanor, took his place at the bench. The room fell into hushed silence, tension thickening the air. With a tight-lipped expression, the judge surveyed everyone like a teacher searching for a rebellious student. Then his gaze locked on Felicia. "You there," he said, fixing on her as if she were a spotlighted target. "Stand up." She hesitated, heart thumping. She stood, trying to appear calm. "You're wearing a religious symbol," he announced, voice stern. "That is not allowed in my courtroom. I'm imposing a $50 fine for violating decorum." A wave of surprise rolled through the benches. People shifted awkwardly, uncertain if they should look at Felicia or stare at the floor. Even the bailiff blinked, momentarily thrown by how swiftly and decisively the judge had singled her out. Felicia's stomach tightened. She'd never been the kind of person who sought confrontation, but this felt like an unnecessary humiliation. Before we go further, let me take a quick second. If you're here reading or imagine you're listening, please remember to drop a like, hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. I love seeing our community come together, and your support means so much. Now back to Felicia, standing before that bench. She lifted her chin. "Your Honor, I'm sorry, but is there an official rule posted about this?" Judge Whitaker's expression darkened. "I enforce the standards of this courtroom. End of discussion." Felicia stayed rooted in place. She knew that if she cowered now, not only would she be complicit in her own silencing, but she would also fail to support her cousin. "I respect your position, sir," she replied evenly, "but I'd like to see the specific guidelines stating that a pendant like mine is against courtroom policy." Several onlookers glanced her way with a flicker of admiration. A few heads nodded, almost imperceptibly. Tension tightened around the judge's eyes. "You can pay the fine or leave," he said, turning to shuffle his documents. She didn't budge. "I'm not leaving, Your Honor. My cousin's case is about to be called, and I intend to be present." Silence draped over the room. A crinkle of confusion appeared on the brows of those who had never seen someone so calmly stand up to a judge's pronouncement. Even the prosecutor stopped rifling through his folder. The bailiff cleared his throat. "Ma'am," the judge said at last, "if you're still standing, I can hold you in contempt." Felicia's mind buzzed with thoughts of what that would entail: jail time, more fines, or who knew what else. But a different resolve bubbled up in her chest. "Understood, Your Honor. Still, I'd like to know where this rule originates. Is it local policy? State directive? I'm not trying to be difficult, but I take this matter seriously." The judge's face twitched. "Who are you?" "My name is Felicia Nguyen. I came today for my cousin Rodrigo's hearing. He's been accused of resisting arrest during a routine traffic stop. I'm here in a supportive capacity, but I also happen to be an attorney." Someone in the back said, "Oh," in a startled tone. A wave of hushed commentary rippled through the crowd. Felicia's posture never faltered. She said nothing more, letting the weight of her words settle. The judge's posture stiffened. "An attorney," he repeated, as though the word left a bitter taste. "Where are you licensed?" "Louisiana, Arkansas, and this state. I specialize in constitutional rights." Now the entire room fell into an even deeper hush, an almost electric calm. Even the bailiff took one subtle step back. Felicia could see surprise flicker across his features. Maybe he'd had her pegged as just another onlooker, someone who'd clutched at a necklace without reading the rules. No one had expected her to speak so knowledgeably or stand her ground so firmly. The judge blinked. "We'll get to your cousin's case," he said, sounding more guarded. "But for the moment, pay the fine or be seated." Felicia exhaled. "With respect, Your Honor, I cannot pay what appears to be an arbitrary penalty. I'd like a written statute or an explanation. If none exists, I respectfully challenge this sanction." A man in the front row fumbled with his glasses, and a woman behind him exchanged a significant look with her neighbor. It was one of those moments when everyone realized the entire day had just taken a sharp turn. The usual routine of traffic violations and small claims had suddenly cracked wide open. Rodrigo's case was called, and he rose, looking tense in his rumpled dress shirt. He met Felicia's gaze, uncertain whether he should feel pride or worry for her. She offered him a quick nod that seemed to say, "Trust me, we'll be fine." As he stepped to the defendant's table, the public defender approached. But Felicia spoke first, polite yet unmistakably confident. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to represent Mr. Reyes for this hearing." The judge narrowed his eyes, but he allowed it. "Proceed." Felicia joined her cousin at the table. She placed a neat folder in front of her, each page organized in crisp order. Then she looked at the judge. Rodrigo was pulled over for a broken taillight. That was the justification for the stop. After a quick check of his ID, he was asked to step outside his vehicle and was subsequently searched. There's no mention of a warrant, nor any probable cause noted in the arrest record. She flipped the top page in her folder. Furthermore, the claim that he resisted arrest seems based solely on an officer's statement. The body cam footage has not been submitted to corroborate, even though local policy requires it be recorded and entered as evidence. I'm asking for immediate dismissal based on a lack of probable cause and insufficient documentation to support the resisting charge. A few members of the audience, clearly waiting for their own cases, leaned forward, intrigued. The judge read over the motion Felicia offered. His gaze moved swiftly, scanning the references to recent rulings that Felicia had cited. At last, he set the papers aside. Defense is requesting a dismissal or, at minimum, a withdrawal of the resisting arrest charge. Prosecutor. The prosecutor stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. "We're open to dropping the resisting charge if the defendant pleads to the broken taillight infraction." Felicia's tone remained respectful, but she was unyielding. "We'll accept a simple fix-it notice on the light, but we insist on noting that the search was improper. If the record doesn't reflect that my client's rights were disregarded, then there's no accountability." The judge's jaw tightened. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Eventually, he said, "Fine. The resisting arrest charge is dismissed. The defendant shall receive a fix-it warning regarding the vehicle's taillight. No additional fines or penalties." A whoosh of relief came from Rodrigo, who managed not to grin too broadly. Felicia allowed herself a slight nod, keeping her composure. She felt an unspoken gratitude from her cousin. He knew she'd gone above and beyond, and she'd done it quietly, with precision. And that might have been the end of Felicia's involvement, had it not been for one final detail. Before she could return to her seat, she spoke again in a voice clear enough for all to hear. "Your Honor, I'd like to revisit the earlier matter. The fine imposed for my pendant. I believe it's unjust, and I request that you retract it." The judge lifted an eyebrow. "You want that on the record?" "Yes, sir. I do. Our Constitution protects freedom of expression, including religious symbols or personal items, as long as they're not disruptive. I've seen no official posting or policy stating that modest jewelry is disallowed here. By fining me, this court effectively took an adversarial stance on a matter that should be neutral, according to the First Amendment." The prosecutor's mouth opened slightly, as though he had something to say, but then thought better of it. The bailiff tightened the grip on his notepad, and a few spectators actually leaned forward on their benches, mesmerized. Nobody coughed, nobody moved. Judge Whitaker, stoic as ever, glanced at a paper on his desk that presumably contained the order for her fine. He looked back up. "I see." A pause. "Then let it be noted that the penalty is voided. This court will not penalize you for wearing a small star pendant." People didn't applaud, not exactly, but there was a rustle of tension dissolving into awe. Felicia offered a nod of thanks. She returned to the bench where she'd been sitting, and the judge proceeded with the next case. Everyone was still reeling from how easily the typical balance of power had been disrupted. They kept turning to look at Felicia. Curiosity mingled with admiration. By the time the last case was called and the judge declared a recess, Felicia rose to leave. She felt a light tap on her elbow. The bailiff stood there. "Ma'am," he said in a low voice, "I just wanted to say I've never seen him backtrack like that." Felicia nodded quietly. "I didn't intend to challenge him to make a spectacle, but certain things can't be ignored." Outside, the midday sun glinted off the row of cars near the courthouse steps. Rodrigo walked alongside her, his cell phone in hand. Messages lit up the screen. He stared at them incredulously. Word had already spread, apparently, with a few local reporters tweeting something about attorney corrects judge, stands firm on constitutional rights. "This is incredible," he said, stuffing the phone into his pocket. "I can't believe you handled it like that." She shrugged. "It's not about winning a big showdown. It's about making sure people know they have the right to question things. Nothing changes if nobody speaks up." He shot her a grateful look. "Still, I owe you dinner or 1,000 dinners. Honestly, I was worried that I'd end up paying more fines than I could ever afford." She shook her head gently. "You owe me nothing, cousin. But you can drop a like on this story if it ever shows up online, and hit that subscribe button on any platform that's covering it." That drew a laugh from him, but she added with sincerity, "Oh, and you might want to let folks know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It helps spread the word that small voices can be heard." He chuckled. Noted. Later that evening, after she'd driven back to her hometown of Ridgeway, Felicia sat in her modest apartment, laptop open to a flood of emails. Word travels fast on the internet, especially when there's a compelling story. People from different corners of the state, and even beyond, were reaching out. Some asked for help with their own legal troubles. Others just wanted to thank her for showing that calm but firm resolve could tip the scales of justice, even if only a little. She remembered how she'd grown up in a cramped row house with her mother, who told her from a young age, never be afraid to ask why. She recalled reading thick textbooks at age 12, determined to understand the structures of power that sometimes pressed hardest on people with the fewest resources. By 15, she had decided she would fight for the vulnerable. At 16, she'd begun volunteering in a community legal clinic, absorbing everything like a sponge. Law school, for Felicia, wasn't about prestige or vanity. It was about building the knowledge to make a difference. She'd quietly excelled, surprising classmates who thought she was simply polite and mild-mannered. They learned soon enough that her soft voice belied a sharp intellect and unwavering moral compass. When she passed the bar exams in multiple states, she could almost hear her mother's voice cheering from the next room. Now, it was second nature for her to walk into a place like the Hartridge County Courthouse and remain polite, even while she dismantled a flawed argument. She took no delight in humiliating a judge. He was human, subject to missteps like everyone else. But she also refused to let an outdated notion go unchallenged, especially when it infringed on basic freedoms. 1 week after the hearing, a local newspaper wrote a feature on that day's events. They interviewed a few people who had been present, including a woman who said, "I'd never seen anyone question the judge so calmly. She didn't yell, didn't grandstand. She just cited facts. It made me think about how easy it is to accept rules without questioning who made them or why." Felicia read the article with a thoughtful tilt of her head. She appreciated that the piece highlighted the real lesson. Quiet confidence is sometimes more potent than thunderous confrontation. The next morning, she got a call from a radio station in a neighboring county, asking if she could come on air to discuss courtroom rights and public decorum. She hesitated not because she disliked sharing knowledge, but because media appearances always felt slightly out of her comfort zone. Still, she said yes, seeing it as another chance to remind everyday folks that they needn't be voiceless. By the way, the radio host said at the end of the call, "I hope you'll tell your story from start to finish. People love hearing how something so small as a star pendant got the system to blink for a moment." grandmother, who'd worn a day in and day out as she raised Felicia's mother on a shoestring budget, never once wavering in her hope for a fairer world. She'd passed it down to Felicia with the words, "Let this remind you of the light you carry inside. Don't hide it for anyone." When Felicia thought about that inheritance, she didn't see it as a mere piece of jewelry. It was a promise that she would keep shining, especially where others might cast shadows. And on that pivotal day in court, the star had done exactly that, become the focal point that made the judge question his own assumptions. Word of this incident drifted into the ear of Professor Barnes at the local law school in Greenvale. She invited Felicia to speak at a symposium on legal ethics and the rights of ordinary citizens in court. Felicia found herself hesitant yet again. Public speaking wasn't her top passion. But how could she say no? The forum was packed with eager law students, curious about how the law could be used to empower the underrepresented. Felicia remembered sitting in those same seats years ago, wondering if she could ever stand at a podium and share experiences that might inspire others. She began her talk by recounting the finer points of due process and the Fourth Amendment. Then she told the story of the day she quietly refused to remove her pendant. "Sometimes," she said, scanning the sea of youthful faces, "you'll be in a position where someone with power believes they have the final say. But if they're not upholding what's right, don't hesitate to ask for clarity. Ask for the rule, the statute, or the rationale. This isn't about disrespecting authority. It's about making sure authority is anchored in fairness." A ripple of applause traveled through the auditorium. One student raised a hand. "Aren't you worried about backlash?" Felicia shook her head gently. "Standing up for what's right can certainly cause friction. But the real danger is in never speaking up at all. If we let fear keep us silent, then we allow unjust precedents to thrive unchecked." After the symposium, more requests poured in. Would she be willing to advise a pro bono clinic? Could she come talk to a group of high school seniors studying civics? People wanted to hear from the attorney who'd calmly turned a judge's challenge on its head, as though her composure was some sort of magic formula. But Felicia knew there was nothing magical about it. It was simply the product of diligence, empathy, and a pinch of courage. Meanwhile, local chatter suggested that Judge Whitaker had started re-evaluating his stance on courtroom neutrality. A clerk mentioned that the judge had asked whether any official guidelines existed regarding jewelry or personal expression. He'd apparently discovered there was nothing in writing, only an unwritten custom he'd carried over from older days. Realizing it was an overreach, he quietly changed course, ending a policy that, in truth, had never truly been formal in the first place. About 2 months after the incident, Felicia returned to Hartridge County Courthouse for an unrelated case involving a housing dispute. She saw the same bailiff who recognized her and gave a slight nod. She glimpsed the same benches, the same scuffed floors. But there was a new sign posted in the lobby that outlined decorum rules. No disruptive behavior, phones on silent, no unauthorized recordings. Nowhere did it mention restricting small personal symbols. That change, small though it was, made Felicia smile inwardly. She didn't need public applause, just evidence that a ripple had turned into something tangible. After that hearing, she headed for the exit, and there stood Judge Whitaker near the wide front doors. He didn't appear quite as rigid as before. He stepped forward with a hint of awkwardness. "Ms. Nguyen." She paused, inclining her head respectfully. "I just wanted to say, I hope there are no hard feelings," he said. "Sometimes tradition blinds us. It wasn't my intent to single you out that day, though I certainly did." Felicia let out a measured breath. "I appreciate that, Your Honor. All anyone wants is fairness." The judge nodded. "Keep doing what you're doing, Ms. Nguyen. People need that kind of integrity in the system." She thanked him, and they parted ways. In the parking lot, she felt the star pendant slip under the lapel of her jacket as she opened the car door. She touched it lightly and thought, the right word at the right time can turn a seemingly immovable wall into an open doorway. That evening, she stopped by Rodrigo's place. He was all smiles, flipping channels with one hand and eating takeout with the other. "Cousin, you're my hero," he teased, referencing how folks kept calling or messaging him about the attorney who set the record straight. She rolled her eyes, smirking. "Don't overhype me. I'm just doing my job." But deep inside, she knew this wasn't purely a job. It was more like a calling, shaped by nights of reading about people who'd been wronged and deciding to be part of the solution. And for you reading along, if Felicia's story resonates, if it sparks even a flicker of hope, remember to tap that like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and please tell me in the comments where you're following from. Your engagement helps keep these moments alive in collective memory, so we don't forget the power each of us holds to question injustice when we see it. Sure, Felicia's moment in that courtroom garnered local media attention, but in time, bigger, flashier headlines would surface, overshadowing her quiet stand. That's how news cycles flow. Yet some truths don't fade so easily. They slip into people's conversations, urging them to speak up if they see a neighbor treated unfairly. They remind them that authority isn't infallible. They embolden them to say, "Hang on, can I see the rule that authorizes this?" instead of automatically bowing their heads. Months trickled by, and Felicia continued her work at a legal nonprofit, assisting families who faced unjust eviction notices or were caught in a system that favored bigger pockets over basic fairness. On a Tuesday afternoon, she received a letter without a return address. Inside was a simple note. "As promised, we have revised the guidelines. No further mention of attire restrictions unless they're truly disruptive. Sincerely, W." She recognized the initial. It was a small olive branch, one that spoke volumes about the judge's transformation. She kept the note in a neat binder alongside her law school diploma, not to gloat, but as a reminder that change often begins in the most unexpected places. Maybe it starts with a quiet question, a gentle push against the status quo. Maybe it's carried by someone who didn't plan on being the center of attention, but circumstances demanded they speak. The final lesson was one Felicia sometimes shared with local youth groups. True power lies not in the thunder of shouting, but in the firmness of knowledge. When you know your rights and stay respectful, it's astounding what walls can come down. So, let this story sit with you. Remember that even a modest pendant, a little star, or whatever symbol you hold dear, can become the catalyst for something bigger when paired with the courage to question and the will to protect what's right. And if that resonates, don't leave this moment without responding in some way. Hit that like, make sure you're subscribed, and drop a comment about where you're tuning in from. You never know how far a small spark can travel once we share it with each other.